Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another edition of our webinar series, Inside Immigration. Today, we are joined by our panelists, Peter Salerno and Jonathan Green, who will provide us with the latest developments in Canadian immigration. Please feel free to ask any questions via the questions icon at the top of your screen or in the chat. We will do our best to address them at the end. If the panelists do not get to your question, you can contact them through the information provided on screen right now. And with that being said, I'll hand things over to Peter and Jonathan.
All right, thank you, Eve. Nice to be with everyone today. Thank you for joining us. My name is Peter, also joined by my colleague here, Jonathan, as well, and we're very excited to go through the agenda you can see on the screen here. Some very exciting updates. Firstly, starting with the rules surrounding Canadian citizenship. There's a new and exciting law that's coming into, the government's hoping to come into effect very quickly. It's Bill C-71, and it affects who will be eligible to apply for Canadian citizenship. So under the current rules that were put into place in 2008, there was a second generation cutoff rule that was implemented, which limited citizenship by descent to the first generation born abroad under the Citizenship Act. So in practical terms, if a Canadian obtained their citizenship by descent while being born abroad, the amendment in 2008 and under the current rules, the amendment prohibited them, that person, from passing on their citizenship to their child also born abroad. And at the time, the government put this into effect because with the rationale that it was protecting the value of Canadian citizenship by ensuring that citizens have a real connection to Canada. So this new legislation under C-71, the government again is hoping to have come into effect very quickly, would make two big changes. Number one, the bill, if passed, would automatically confer citizenship to any person born abroad who would have been a citizen were it not for this first generation cutoff or limit. So these individuals can apply under the new rule or new law when it comes into effect, not yet. These individuals can apply for proof of citizenship and submit those applications. And then the other big change, anyone who, there'd be a new framework for applying for citizenship by descent moving forward if the individual is not born yet after the law comes into effect. So in that situation, there would need to be there's going to be a substantial connection test. So the first generation born abroad will need to show that they've been in Canada for at least 1,095 days when their child is born or when the child is adopted. They'll need to show at least 3 years of physical presence in Canada. It's not within the 5-year period before the child is born or adopted, but it will be, there is no time frame. You will simply, our understanding at this point is that you'll just need to show the 1,095 days. And this will be hugely significant, we're imagining, for thousands and thousands of people. So very exciting news there on the citizenship front. The law, as I said, has not come into effect yet. We're expecting new updates from the government in as we get closer to August. So so stay tuned for citizenship updates if that's of interest to you. The next area we wanted to cover really quickly here, because the government has announced a new program regarding caregivers, but has not yet released substantive detailed information about it yet. So we're just flagging here. The announcement was made on June 3rd. This would be a new pilot program, or programs for that matter, to hire foreign national caregivers from abroad. We're expecting it to launch in about end of this year, early 2025. I will put in a little note here that our office is also doing a webinar on July 2nd, I believe, to speak more to the substantive details as from what we know about these new pilot programs. From what we know now, the minimum language proficiency scores will need to be about CLB 4 in each category. The foreign national applicant will need to have a minimum high school education or equivalent Canadian high school education. Relevant work experience hasn't yet been defined as far as we know by the government, as well as whether what constitutes recent work experience. So there's still some gaps there, but also a very exciting update for individuals looking for information about and new options for caregivers and bringing them to Canada.
Yeah, Peter,
yeah.
Sorry, just to quickly jump in, I think another important piece of that program is, as of now, the guidance is there is no requirement yet upon arrival into Canada as a permanent resident to conduct caregiving job duties. So we're waiting for a little bit more clarity on that. Previous pilot programs for caregivers, there was, a requirement upon entry with a work permit to conduct and perform some of those duties. We're waiting for further information on that as well.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And then moving forward to express entry, which I'm sure is an area that a lot of our clients are interested in. We're seeing, unfortunately, the government's draws and activity in this area, issuing invitations to apply for permanent residence. It's been largely quiet over the last month. The most recent draw, I believe there was only one in the last few weeks, and the minimum necessary score was 522. So we're not seeing a drop in the minimum necessary CRS scores, unfortunately. What we are seeing is more and more of our clients looking at alternative options, whether it's PNP options, but regrettably, we're not seeing much movement on the express entry front. And processing times, however, for applicants who have submitted the permanent resident applications, we're seeing fairly quick processing times. But of course, the main issue is getting that invitation to apply, and not a lot of changes over the last few weeks, unfortunately. And then moving on to our fourth topic, which is processing times generally. We're seeing generally a little bit longer processing times than for most of the overseas offices. Some are more lengthy than others, of course. Inside Canada, we're seeing about 3 to 4 months. Seems to be pretty consistent over the last recent past, at least. The global 2-week processing for higher skilled occupations seems to be the government seems to be complying with their service standard, or adhering to it for that matter. And that's a 2-week service standard for processing high skilled work permit applications. That's generally we're generally seeing the government actually make the decisions within 2 weeks. Jonathan, have you had any applications filed under the global talent stream by any chance, or anything like that?
Yeah, so I have had some, and it really is dependent on the country that is reviewing the application. So we've seen certain countries never adhere to the 2-week processing time for work permits that they should be. We've seen a couple countries, sort of the rarer countries, process nearly everything within that 2-week processing time. And then I would say for the most part, the large majority of countries have certain instances and periods where they're adhering to that 2-week processing time. But I think our advice with clients have always been, it's unlikely, it's possible for global talent stream applications that they fall into that 2-week period. But likely it'll be, after that 2-week period, but hopefully within or near the posted processing time for that country.
Yeah, and that's what I'm seeing with the applications filed under the global skills as well. So generally, it's been a positive, good experience for applications filed under that higher skilled processing stream. As far as just the portals are concerned, nothing hugely significant over the last couple of weeks. I will say applicants we're finding using the access to information requests for entries and exits specifically the government has introduced is actually moving very quickly. So the processing of those requests are moving typically within 30 days, which has been excellent. Besides that, not a huge amount of updates on portals.
Great. And the other thing I would just quickly add to what Peter mentioned related to processing times is the government is still, like he mentioned, prioritizing a lot of those high-skilled positions, but they are, in certain instances, prioritizing what they deem as essential occupations. So things like healthcare workers, construction, areas like that. And so the processing times for those sorts of applications will likely be faster as well, and that's abroad and also within Canada. With respect to, we'll start with item 5 here, the study permit cap update. So for background for anyone on the call, the government started making some pretty dramatic changes to the study permit program in Canada at the end of this past year, 2023. So in December of 2023, the government introduced a significantly higher low-income cutoff for study permit applicants. So previously, if you were a single applicant applying for a study permit to Canada, I believe the low-income cutoff was $10,000. So you had to provide evidence of that financial, the evidence of having those finances in order to support your stay. And that was significantly increased in December to about $20,000. It was the first really increase in, I think, over a decade. So it was a dramatic increase. And then one of the more significant changes was in January, where the government introduced a cap on the number of study permit holders in Canada. Immigration Canada introduced about I believe it was 35% reduction in study permit approvals. That's their hope. And assigned to each province and territory a certain number of study permit submissions that they can make, assuming that a certain number of them will be refused. So different provinces and territories were responsible for introducing or providing those the allocated cap to different universities, colleges, areas like that. And so we've seen those provincial attestation letters, which would be issued by the province, provided, but we've started to see the impact on processing for study permits as well. So one of the most significant impacts is there has been an increase in the refusal rate that we've seen in the past couple of months for study permits. I believe the study permit refusal rate across the board, it is dependent on the country, as well as a lot of other factors for individuals. But I believe the refusal rate was around, I believe 50%, and it's gone up to around 60%. So we've seen a marked increase in the refusal rate. And I think the big takeaway from that is it's important to ensure your application is as strong as possible. Speaking with us, booking a consultation with an immigration lawyer to go over items like a study plan, making sure you have all the documentation in your application, because there is such a reduced cap in the number of study permits that have been offered. The processing time has also gone up dramatically, or not dramatically, but by a couple of weeks. It does change depending on the time, but we've seen a marked increase in the processing time as well. So if you are looking to come to Canada for the September 2024 school year, it's important to get your application in sooner rather than later, so you're here for the start of the school year. So that's, I think, the big takeaway with respect to the study permit cap. We're still waiting to see exactly the final numbers for the September school year, for the annual year. The goal for the study permit cap is that this reduction was issued for a 2-year period, and then the government will review that temporary period and see if the study permit allocation should be increased or decreased. And further, it doesn't have any impact on current students. So students who have previously issued a study permit shouldn't have any issues renewing their study permit in Canada. There are some other special measures that have been introduced or extended in the past month since our previous webinar. So the first one is there was a previous upcoming expiry to the measures related to Israeli nationals and Palestinian passport holders. who are in Canada. That was planning to expire June 12th, and that's been extended for another year. And so this program is specifically for individuals who are in Canada and they wish to stay. So there's the ability to apply for an open work permit. And this is distinct from other programs related to having being in Israel or being in Palestine with Canadian citizen or permanent resident living in Canada. That's a distinct program, and there was recently some additional guidance on that. But for this program, if you're currently in Canada, you have the ability to apply for an open work permit, a study permit, areas like that, and the applications are also fee exempt. Further to that, there's been an introduction of measures to support family members affected by the crisis in Haiti, very similar to the other program above. So for any Haitian nationals in Canada, they have the ability to apply for an open work permit, study permit. A lot of those applications are fee exempt, so they won't be required to pay any government fees there. But it's a similar program to support Canada's humanitarian efforts related to Haiti. I'm not sure, Peter, if you have anything maybe to add on those two fronts.
No.
Okay, great. And then the last, and I think one of the more significant announcements in the past month was related to flagpoling at the border. So the government introduced some very clear guidance related to flagpoling, which is the principle of exiting Canada and re-entering at the border for the purposes of obtaining Canadian immigration services that could be readily available online. So the government's perspective has always been to, if you are within Canada, you're able to submit an application within Canada. Many individuals have been circumventing that method by driving to a land border and applying at that land border. The government's guidance was in the past couple of months, a large portion of all flagpolers were postgraduate work permit holders. So individuals who had just recently or within the past year or two graduated from a Canadian post-secondary institution, university, college, and are looking to obtain a postgraduate work permit or to renew a postgraduate work permit. So the government has set a ban on the ability to flagpole for them. Their guidance for years has always been against flagpoling, as is ours. It can create significant complications, especially for individuals who require visas to come to Canada or the US. And so our recommendation has always been to apply within Canada if possible. If you do have the legal right to apply upon entry into Canada, then our recommendation would be to leave Canada for a significant period of time and then return, rather than just entering the US or attempting to enter the US and then turn your car around and drive into Canada. That said, every situation is different. It depends on a range of circumstances, especially with this. So if this is something you're considering, if you are a postgraduate work permit holder, it is now banned. But if it is something you're considering and you may be eligible for it, we highly recommend speaking to immigration counsel or a lawyer before doing so, because it can have significant implications on your current work status or your current status, in addition to any future permanent residency application or any renewals. So it is a significant update. There was pressure from the US to implement something like this because of the traffic and associated administrative burden facing US officials when individuals attempt to flagpole. And so we'll see there may be additional bans or additional guidance related to this in the future. So something to keep an eye out for. And I think with that said, unless Peter has anything else to add, we're more than happy to take any specific questions, comments, anything like that.
Nothing more on my side to add to that. I think that was really helpful. But the flagpoling in particular, I think that may impact a lot of the students, the international students who are graduating. So thanks for walking us through that, Jonathan. I do see one question, and everybody else, all of the rest of the listeners, please feel free to add any questions if you have any. I do see one regarding European Francophone or French speakers who have passed CELPIP and TEF exams, and about eligibility to apply under the PNP program, specifically in Ontario. I would encourage in that particular case to reach out to our office, because French speakers are being targeted under the government's express entry system. There hasn't been a French language specific draw since April, but that the government doesn't give any warning or advance notice prior to those draws occurring. So another draw, I think it may be worthwhile for our office to calculate the CRS score under express entry. And it could be a matter of potentially creating an express entry profile with that French language proficiency, as well as also looking at the OANP eligibility criteria. The points under the OANP and the program requirements are subject to change. So we would want to make sure that you are not only meeting minimum requirements under the program, but also you're going to be a competitive candidate to be selected under that program too. So we're happy to review that, and we'd encourage you to reach out to us. You can reach out to our general information line, or to, of course, Jonathan or I regarding this. We'd be happy to speak with you.
And if I can just quickly add to that, Peter, as well, there hasn't been a draw since April in the category-based selection for French language speakers, but the guidance from government officials and everything that we've seen is that it is a priority to bring in French language speakers outside of Quebec under the express entry system. So we do anticipate, although there's no guarantee, that there will be draws in the next couple of months towards the end of the year. So definitely something to consider.
Yeah. I don't see any other questions unless I'm missing something. Jonathan, you don't see any other, do you?
Nope, I don't see any as well.
Okay. All right. Well then, I think that's everything we wanted to cover today.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Peter and Jonathan, for sharing your expert knowledge. So as Peter's mentioned before, if you'd like to discuss any of today's topics in more detail or have any questions that we weren't able to get to, please reach out and book a consultation, and details can be found on the screen right now. I also encourage all of you to sign up for our e-alerts and follow us on our social media, and that way you can stay up to date on the latest developments in Canadian immigration. Thank you so much for joining, and take care. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.